Okay, good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis, volume 2, page Aleph Kuf Samach 1160, close to the bottom. So what we learned last week was essentially by the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. There's the two levels of Ayin, the Ayin of the Yesh HaMiti, the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. They serve as a channel, as a field of energy that interfaces between Yesh HaMiti and Yesh HaNivra. So you essentially have three levels, and the middle level breaks into two. Yesh HaMiti is the creator, Yesh HaNivra, Ayin Be'ems is the Oyer that carries the power of creation to existence and introduces Bittel, and the Yesh, and that divides into two. The Ayin of the Yesh HaMiti, which we learned at length, the different levels, the different types of Bittel, the Oyer, selflessness, and then there's the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, which is also Ayin Eliki. It's also it's a Koyach Eliki, a divine energy, but it's a divine energy that is tailored and commensurate to creating, shaping, and defining existence. Like the Asar Ma'amoris, which is already a dibur, a speaking that goes outside Kavyachol, so to speak, of the speaker. The Eibishter speaking, and each creation has its own mimer, has its own letters that vivify and energize it. So on one hand, it's still an ayin because it remains of a different substance and remains mysterious. It's not of the same substance of the yesh. It's a different, it's a loy dover legabe mitzias hayesh. So you call loy dover, it's not existent in the context of what we call something that exists in a apparent way. At the same time, however, it gives space for existence. That's why it's tefes mokim. Like he says, the yesh hanivra is tefes mokim legabe this level of ayin, and the ayin is mislabish and nitfis. It's nitfis and mislabish. It encloses itself in the particular creation, and as such, he said. Therefore, the Daas Elyon, Daas Tachton that we said are not just how the Yesh HaMiti sees existence, where the Yesh is above and the Ayin below, and everything is bottled. Everything is nullified. And Daas Tachton would be the creation looking upward. So the Yesh is existence, and the Ayin is the unknown divine energy. But also in the Ayin itself, you have Daas Elyon and Daas Tachton, where Daas Elyon of Atzmos, of the Yesh HaMiti, is assumed by the Yesh HaNivra, by the Ayin of the Yesh HaMiti, and Daas Tachton is assumed by the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. In other words, it's not just creation sees it that way, the Ayin also sees it through the eyes, so to speak, from the perspective, like he said these words, that it's the Daas Tachton Shia B'ha'arish B'chinas Mokal Yesh Hadeyahi K'moy Daas HaMekabel Shalamati Yesh Shalamayla Ayin. So it's like the teacher seeing through the eyes of the student. And of course, the other way around is when we want to have the student look through the eyes of the teacher. So basically, that's the two levels of Daas Tachton, Daas Elyon, and Daas Tachton. Another key point, another element in this is that the Oyer of the Ayin of the Yesh HaMiti gets concealed and covered, Keil Mistater, he said, in order for there to be a creation. The Ayin of the Yesh HaMiti is beyond concealment and beyond revelation. It's altogether beyond existence. So there, it's not subject to concealment, like he said. Etzem, the words he used before, it was earlier. He said, where is it? That the air that is davuk, the air that is attached, completely attached to its source, and it reflects its source, is not subject to change, and it's also not subject to concealment. Oh, he said it actually later. I'll point it out in a moment. Okay. Whereas the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra is concealed within the Yesh HaNivra. That's why the Yesh doesn't feel it. So then he brought, the next point was Habit Mishamayim Re'eh, that there's two expressions, gazing and seeing. He said gazing is Mamayla Lamato. When God gazes as existence, he said, the Medrash says, Ein Habot El Mamayla Lamato. Habot, gazing is from the top down. Riyah, the Medrash in Echo says, is Riyah Mekorev. You see something's close up, and Habot is from a distance. So the Rebbe Rashab explained that Habot Mamayla is Daas Elyon. It looks at everything from top down, and is distant because the yesh is meruchak legamri ve'ein tefes malkum klal compared to that level of ayin of the das of the yesh amiti Daas Elyon. Whereas Riya Mamata Lamaila, seeing things from the bottom up, so to speak, is Daas Tachton, and that's Korev. That's Korev because it relates to the Yesh, so it's close to the Yesh. Can everybody mute? Okay. Okay. Rebbe Rashab also focused on a line that the Salmos, the concealment, is not only that it's concealed from the creation, it's also concealed within itself. In other words, the ayin goes in a state of concealment. And we learned this earlier as well. The concealment is not just that student doesn't sense that level of energy, but also the teacher, so to speak, is concealing himself within it. Just the Salmos ba'atzmei. Why he's focusing that here is probably just makes the ayin even more, identifies even more with the student that way. So in other words, it's not just that the teacher doesn't reveal it all so the student can absorb and assimilate the idea, but the teacher himself goes to that level where he's speaking in a level where he himself is concealing his own brilliance in order to be able to bond and connect with the student more. That's what it sounds like it's saying. Okay. Oh, here he says, so this Helen Behester, he said, is only in the ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. The ba'era asmi lo yesh alomas v'esteirim ke'eni be'erech HaNivraim, these becomes the Salmos l'serech HaNivraim. So in other words, concealment is only when you're in, at least something is commensurate. Two things relate to one another, and one is higher than the other, so it needs to conceal itself. So the lower level can emerge and appreciate and absorb whatever is being transmitted. But the level of Ayin Yesh Amiti is altogether not about creation. It's about God's expression. And and as such, it's not subject to that concealment. So when you do say Helam there you mean Helam Be'etzem. That's fundamentally beyond revelation altogether. Not because it needs to be concealed in order for the recipient to receive. Like you said, Helam Be'etzem, because all it is the expression of Atzmus and all the 4 different levels of Ayin that we learned earlier. Okay, that's where we stopped. It's a line that begins, Shu B'chin is Helam Be'etzem. I'm going to continue now from L'chein al Zeh Nemar. L'chein, and therefore al Zeh Nemar, on this it says in the Pasuk, Hayetze Yachad Libam Kulam B'Yachad. So Hayetze Yachad Libam means the one that shapes, that forms them all Yachad, together, their hearts all, he like essentially forms and connects all their hearts together. Kulam B'Yachad, all of them as one. So in other words, you have many, but they're all being bound together. The Rebbe Rashab says that this is Ukamoyin V'kulam Niskarim B'skira Achas. When we say all of them are Niskarim, are looked upon, B'skira Achas, one gaze, one look. It's like having a bird's eye view of something where you see many different things, but you see them all as one because you don't see them as fragmented details. The B'skira Achas, with one gaze, you have the whole picture. This is usually referred to Adam Kadman, where you see the whole picture in one snapshot, so to speak. So how is this relevant here? So he says, She'ein b'zeh is chalkus klal. When you have that type of perspective, there's no distinction. You're not seeing, it's like when you look at a painting, let's say. You're not looking at the detail, this line, that line. You see one image. If you look closely, you see that image is made up of details. But from the Skira Achas perspective, when it's a state of Hayetze, when he says Hayetze Yachad Libam, it's essentially seeing the one total picture, which consists of details. So there's no Hischalkus Klal, because at that point you're looking at a vision of something. So you're building a home. When you're building the details, each detail matters. But if you look at this is the home I want, where I'm going to live in, you're not focusing on the Hischalkus at all. You're focusing on that Okay, so the truth is we stopped here, but this is actually the end of the statement before. That's by the Atzmi. So from the point of view, let's say, of this chief of staff, the king is giving him instructions. Tells him today, tell everybody, every day, the mail department has to do this, the tax department this, the military that, the agricultural department, this department, that department. Everybody's got their role. From the point of view of the chief of staff, which like here's the Atzmi, all is to one thing. The king wants all of this. One big picture. The ones who break it down in details are the ones that are going to implement it. But from the point of view of the one who's representing the king, it's one skirachas. That's what he's saying here. That the Atzmi, I'll just read it again because it's a flow. And I should have actually stopped after this. I stopped right in the middle of a phrase. The Atzmi is in Daas Tachton, it's korev to the yesh. So it's associating. Yehi Ayin and Yehi Rakia are not the same maimer. The maimer that creates light, and the maimer that creates, the statement that God says that creates heaven, and the statement that says creating desha, vegetation, or the other Asara Mamoris, down to the details, there absolutely the focus is on the detail, is creating not Rakia. Yem Echad is one creation. Yem Sheni is another. Yem Shlishi. Creating Nasa Adam B'Tzalmenu Kenusen is creating a human being, not an animal. However, from Daas Elyon's point of view, which is reflecting Kavonas HaAtzmus, it sees it. What he's saying is, and that's why on this level it says it's one picture. Because from the point of view of the Atzmi, all it's looking at is what does God want? He wants a dira b'tachtenim. He wants tachtenim. He wants a world. That perspective, the focus is on the entire picture. And his chalkus is not the focus there. In the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, the focus is on the details, on the creation of each detail. She says, so that's the level that you say, Avla ha'ora de Daas Tachton. And it's really understandable a lot more when you contrast it. But the perspective from below, meaning if you're looking from the bottom up, from the perspective of creation and the ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, the chayas of the key, the divine energy that's invested in each part of creation, he bo b'bchinas hester or b'bchinas ischalkus. So now he's introducing, in addition to concealment and covering, it's also in a state of ischalkus, distinction. And then he says immediately, the haba ha'talya. And these two things are interdependent. The mepneisha mistater, let's say the chanevroim, due to the fact that this oireliki, think of it, the teacher applying himself to each particular student, to the details, for the tzedek hanevroim, for the need of the tzedek, in other words, focusing on the whole energy is being concealed in order to bring the nevroim into being. So the concealment and the distinction is interdependent. Because you need to conceal, that itself tells you you're moving away from the big picture, you're moving to the specifics. And due to this, that there's a concealment, there's this distinctions between creatures, basagosom, in their comprehension, ubahargososom belakus, in their understanding and their feeling of elikus. So very different how Daimim Tzamei Chaim Medaber experiencing godliness, different how Malachim experience godliness, how Neshamas experience, how each level, whether it's Atzilus, Bri, Yitzir, Asiyah, well, let's not talk about Atzilus, let's talk the Nevroim, how each creature has its own particular perception of godliness. So this distinctions is a result and interdependent with the concealment. So basically, if everything was revealed, if the big picture was revealed, you wouldn't really see the distinctions. This is essentially what the Tzimtzum really does. The Tzimtzum conceals the Er HaBli so that a Gvul can emerge. That's on higher levels. Here he's talking more in context of the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti and the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. Wherever level that is, that could also be the Tzimtzum divides between the two. We learned that as well. So essentially, it's interdependent concealment and distinction. Oh wow! So that goes back all the way to the Maimer Chol Ha'am Roim, which is a Shvuas Maimer, where there he was talking about transforming the tzimtzum of how can a world post-tzimtzum with all its distinctions and its chalkas, that's what he talks at length there, the chalkas that the tzimtzum creates, the distinctions, and yet we can connect it to the utter unity, Shem Echad, total Achdus Apshuta, because we transform it all. Let me just see, Chol Amroyim. That was a Maimer Yashvuos. There it is. If you want to look it up, it's Maimer, page 1002, Aleph Beis, 1002. There he was talking about Yom and Laila. I'm just looking. Okay, it's good because we discussed this in the previous classes. There he discusses how the tzimtzum is really in order to bring gilui. And the gilui before the tzimtzum is in order to be able to go into kelim and into the details. So essentially you have here a very eloquent picture, which is really part of the whole theme of Ayin Beis, where gvul and bli gvul meet in a way that one is not annihilating the other. So the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra is essentially focusing on the creation and bringing godliness tailored and channeled into the specifics of creation existence. The Ayin of the Yesh HaMiti's focus and purpose is to convey God's plan, God's kavanah, the deeper kavanah, which is more of a unifier of the whole picture, like he just said. One is beyond concealment, beyond revelation and concealment, and the other is subject to concealment in the Yesh HaNivra, which is why the Ayin of Yesh HaMiti, the Ayin of Yesh HaNivra is concealed within the existence itself. Okay. So now let's read the last few lines in this paragraph. Uberibay heshtalshlus. Beribay heshtalshlus means with an abundance of evolutionary steps. You can say, put it that way. Abundance of heshtalshlus, of a process. Not just one step, many steps. Bebechinas hester acher hester. From covering to covering. In other words, you're continuously concealing more and more and more as it goes down, say the shtalshlus. Ad sheyachal liyas, hisavas bechinas yesh v'nifrad gomer. To the point that it can create something that is a yesh v'nifrad gomer, which is us. But we sense an egocentric reality that feels completely separate from its source. So even though divine energy is giving us sustenance and life and every moment is renewed, as we discussed, but what's dominant and primary in our lives is the fact that we're a yesh. And then begins the Aveda from the bottom up to sublimate and refine the yesh. But here the Rebbe Rashab is talking about the process of creating the yesh. So the yesh is predicated on concealment. It's not possible to be a yesh and nifrid, what he calls nifrid gomer, if Elikus and the divine energy is revealed within you. That's not a yesh. So the concealment is necessary for the yesh to be, and concealment after concealment, which creates the yesh of Tachtenim. Okay. U'k'moi, the Rebbe Rashab, k'moi elikim acherim, to the point of elikim acherim, meaning other gods, other deities. Shen yemchim b'bchinas acharayim. So the person elikim acherim, lo yilcha elikim acherim, shouldn't have other gods. So what he's saying here, very in brief, this was elaborated earlier in Ayin Beis and other Maimorim of Chassidus, elikim acherim, you come to a point where you could actually have, God forbid, false gods, false deities. How's that possible? If Hashem Echad created us, and that divine energy is giving us sustenance all the time, how's it possible that we should? So the reason is because the concealment of the divine, of godliness, to the point we become a yesh and dover nifrid, yesh v'nifrid gomer, completely separate. So as such, what happens next is it gives the possibility, to the point that you could have other gods. Sheyenki, why is it called acherim, he says? Other gods, because acherim comes from the word acharayim also. It means that they wean and they nurse energy. Not wean is not the right word. Sheyenki means to nurse. It's like yenik is usually refers to getting a very slow flow of energy. It's like when we say the bacteria or maggots or parasites come and they let's say a mosquito comes and draws blood from someone, they do it in a very slight way because they can't. If there's a lot of gilui, there's no room for a sitra achra. Sitra achra is always yenik. That's why you have the expression yenikas achitzenim. What does yenikas achitzenim mean? Why is it yenika? Why not just say it's flowing? A yenika refers obviously to nursing, when a child nurses. So they're not getting a big flow, they're getting a very narrow flow that they're able to contain. So the negative side of it is that yenikas achitzenim is, like he says here, that yenik mebchinas acharayim, like he says in Tanya, that it's sitra achre because it's like throwing something over your shoulder. The klippa and negative energy can never survive if Kedusha was there in the fullest sense of the word. To put it in Gashmizdik example, you see when you pick up sometimes in dark corners where there's moisture, you'll suddenly find all the maggots and all the creatures crawling around. But as soon as you shine a light and you reveal, they all run away because their strength can only be there when it's only a yenika. It can't be there when there's a large gilui. They survive in darkness and they survive in secret, so to speak. And the same thing is in Ruchnius. When a person is at full strength and they're fully dominant, the bacteria don't come. For example, a human being, why don't any negative energies come when a person's alive or even asleep? And suddenly, Rahman al-Islam, when they die, they decompose and all the creatures come out from the woodwork, so to speak, because there's no chayas aliki, no chayas to protect the body. So whenever you have a yenikas achitzim, you can rest assured that it's a very low flow going on there. But they come there. They come with his moisture and they come with his light. But they want it to be. But the chitzenim are yenik from the acharayim, not from the primius. Like Chassidus gives the different examples of shmomish yadayim titofesh, that the spiders, where do the spiders go? Spiders will never come and create a web on top of a bright table. They'll be in corners and crevices, under the table, like the example, the dogs will come under the table to get the shirayim, the bones that are thrown out. Because when there's a strong presence of Kedusha, there's no room for the chitzenim to come. That's why it's always from the acharayim. It's when either they're being ignored or something is going on where like they say by the Rebbe's wedding, all the pickpockets were there. Because there was everyone was involved in the simcha. That's when the pickpockets arrive. Because no one's paying attention. So klippas, yenikas achitzenim, generally Chassidus explains, is either due to makif, where like in a case where you're so removed and aloof, so the chitzenim come because that's the perfect time to pickpocket, or when there's a very deep tzimtzum, so there's very little life force, and they'll also come. You see this all the time. Animals and creatures, when they see vulnerability, they will then try to eat from it, benefit from it. But when there's a lot of gili, you don't have that. So he's basically saying Elikim Acherim is only a result when the gili is so concealed. And Elikim Acherim is saying that the Yankim, they're nursing the beginning Acharayim. The Acharayim, the Shem Elikim, what Acharayim of what? The Acharayim of Shem Elikim, which we said earlier, is the divine energy that conceals the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, Hamahav Kol HaMugbalim, that creates all the defined and finite creatures, like we learned. Havaya is the Koyach HaMahava, there's strong gili there. But in order to create creation, you need Breishis Bara Lekim, where it's manifesting. The words he used earlier was on page 1159. He says, Shema Pa'ula, that the Shema Havaya is Mislabish B'Shema Elikim, the Ha'ara into the Ha'ara of the Ha'ara. And that there, when many Hestadim, when there's enough concealments to the point that you could have a negative energy coming and gleaning and nursing energy for its own purposes. That's all in Daas Tachton, in the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. Aval b'Daas Elyon, but in Daas Elyon, the perspective from above, Lo Yasham Helam, there's no concealment, the Ein Sham Yunika, and there's no nursing. because it's a level that's completely focused on the divine source. Because that energy, the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti, Daas Elyon, is not concealed in order for the purpose of creation. It's not a likim. And compared to that level, when you have a Daas Elyon perspective, all the concealments of this world, which is also, Elam comes from the word Helam V'Ester. Einam Malim, they don't conceal, umastirim klal, they don't cover up at all. So if you have the perspective of Daas Elyon, all this is not subject. The concealments do not affect that perspective. But that's a Daas Elyon perspective. Just to use the example of the chief of staff again, the chief of staff, who's right nearby the king, and his whole role is to convey the king's intentions, there's no possibility of Yenikas HaChetzenim, really. Why? Because he's right there in the palace. He can always check with the king. He's always there. That's his whole role. Where can you have Yenikas HaChetzenim? When he sends the orders outward to the department heads, and each department begins to do its function, and the message continues on in the chain of command, the hierarchy. So of course there, it's very possible that someone will distort something, because there you don't have the same intensity. As I said, the reality check, the moment of the truth and integrity of something, is in its original place. But as soon as it goes out of that space and is focusing on the function, like for example, if you don't have a contractor or you don't have an overseer of, let's say, building a building, the workers may get the orders, they may even follow the orders properly, but then something happens, there's a question mark. And if they don't go back and check with their foreman, or whoever is like giving them, who's making sure that the full picture is being maintained with the integrity being preserved, they can make a mistake. Not only that, it can go worse than a mistake. You can do something completely hepech of the kavanah. And that's why you need constantly, what you have in every company, you have controllers, you have auditors, you have people overseeing it, because you could always, once you go into details that are necessary, you always need a reality check to make sure that it's connecting to the original intent, or else we all know you can go off and completely be hijacked in a completely different direction of what the initial kavanah was. Just as an example of the difference between Daas Elyon and Daas Tachton, where Daas Elyon is the focus is on this big picture and the way the Eibishter sees things, the perspective from above. Daas Tachton is the focus on below. So even though the Ayin Eliki, the Ayin of the Yesh Nivra is an Ayin, it's a level of Elikus, but that Elikus has to go through concealments in order to create details. And as such, there's a possibility when the concealments are deep enough to use the words from Tanya, Helam Achar Helam, to the point, Tachtenim, that it's Chesher Kofel Mechupel, it's a double darkness, to the point that it could be Aniva Afsi Eid, I and nothing else. And unfortunately, when you look around the world, you could see it all the time. You see how people could not only are not aligned with the God's intention and the kavanah, they're actually going off and doing the opposite mamish, to the point of mamish menaga to lakus. How is that possible? So the Rebbe Rashab here, in very brief, is giving us the picture from the highest levels to the lowest levels. Now, obviously, the avodah of our avodah is to reverse the process and take the yesh that can be even a yesh v'nifrid gamur and change and redirect it, and that's of course avodah sa'adam. But here he's not focusing on the avodah right now. He's talking on the process of how this comes into being. So with this, we'll read the last paragraph to the end of the Maimer, but this is going to conclude not the whole subject matter. It's not over yet. There's going to be plenty more about Daas Elyon and Daas Tachton. Because let me just say this before we continue on. Maybe I'll stop for some questions. Remember, the whole subject began, I said, the Rosh Hashanah Maimer, Ayin, on page 1140. Now we're 1160. So we're talking about 20 pages. These 20 pages, by the way, it was taking us like 4 or 5 months. And the reason was not besides the fact that each Maimer of the Rebbe, each line, we learned everything in depth, but we also learned in the process the whole Hemshech Tzadik Daled, which is almost over 70 pages. And we also learned the Rebbe's Maimer B'Yem Hashmini Atzeres, a part of it. So that explains this. So these last 20 pages that we've been learning, Mem to Samach, 40 to 60. Took us, at least I'm thinking 40, 60, 50, around 200 classes. So actually it's much more. What's 200 days? You don't count Shabbos. Talking about at least 5 months. When we began before COVID, I believe, this section. And then we paused for quite a while as well because of the situation. So I want to take you back for a moment. Let's go back a moment. Let's go back to page 1140, just to see the flow. So you'll see there, up till there, if you may recall, we were learning in depth and at length the difference between lechem in ha'aretz and lechem in hashamayim, between weekdays and Shabbos. And on page 1139, he actually said that there's two levels of das. The das that we get from lechem in ha'aretz, that is Daas Tachton, Mamata Lamaila. And then he said, in lechem in ha'aretz, zehu ba'alakusha b'chinas islapshus ba'elamis. I'm go back to page 1139. If you look at the bottom of the page, that's the Veda from the bottom up, to refine, to separate and clarify and refine the animal soul. The bread from heaven, the man, if you remember the whole thing with the man was amshacha from another place, mahu. Man was a mysterious force that comes, he says, from Elikus, that's Lamayla Ma'elamis. V'hu aveda the nefesh elikis mitzad atzmit. It's not the nefesh elikis as it's involved and engaging with the animal soul. It's the nefesh elikis on its own. And that finished the mimer. A few more lines. And then in the next mimer, he said, Ubir Ayin. Look at the bottom of 1140 now. Last 3 lines in 1140. And to explain this, he says, the Hine Beis Yediyasa now. Those 2 perspectives that we just mentioned, from below and from above, Hey Mashakosu Kikel Deis Havaya. And he goes on, Daas Elyon and Daas Tachton. And then he says, to understand Daas Elyon and Daas Tachton on page 1141, he says, to understand that, Lahavin Zeh, around 15 lines from the top in 1141, Lahavin Zeh, Inyan Huidini Yadua, the Beklalos Eshtalshus from the highest to the lowest levels, Yesh, Ayin, Yesh. And then goes on to explain the 2 levels in Ayin. Well, first explains what Yesh is and the Yesh Amiti, Yesh Anivra, the 2 levels of Ayin. So now he's coming back and tying all that up and saying, okay, now we go back to the 2 perspectives. So that connects this to the previous whole flow of Maimorim, which was a good 100 pages, of Yom V'Laila, or Shabbos, and the weekdays. That in order for you to have a complete day, you need Tzimtzum and Gili. Kav and Tzimtzum. Helam and Gili. That's Yom is Gili, Laila is Cheshach, is Helam, but they all both are necessary to create. So the difference between the 2 is Shabbos and the weekdays, Lechem in ha'aretz, Lechem in hashamayim, which is now connecting to Daas Elyon and Daas Tachton. So you see from this, the flow, and the flow is even deeper, because all this is an explanation in the Pasuk, V'yadaita Hayem, V'ashavesa levavecha, ki Hashemu alakim b'shamayim emal v'aretz mitachas, ein oid, which we'll get back to. You'll see in the next Maimorim, it's going to go back to that Pasuk. So all this, when you really look at it, if you want to have the, so to speak, big picture, the Daas Elyon within the Daas Tachton of Ayin Beis, the Daas Elyon of all this is the interface of how the 2 perspectives are necessary and how they connect with each other, which goes back all the way to how we transform the Tzimtzum and how post-Tzimtzum reality can experience a pre-Tzimtzum consciousness. And that takes us all the way back to all the discussions how after the Tzimtzum we can connect Aramimcha L'Kai HaMelech, the central theme of Ayin Beis, the connection of Keser with the Keiches Pnimim, Keser with Keser Makif, Aramimcha with the Eres Pnimim, Eres Pnimim, Makif and Pnimi, which of course goes back all the way to volume 1, which is the central theme of the whole Ayin Beis, this interface on so many different levels. Now, as I mentioned many times, when you start learning Ayin Beis again from the beginning, you'll see a new hemshech altogether. Even if you learned it well, because once you see the whole extension and how the Rebbe Rashab develops different ideas, they all come together into one powerful picture, and you can keep learning it forever. To be honest, I began teaching the Kailel from the beginning of Ayin Beis, just giving summaries of each of the Maimarim. Every week I do a Maimer, or sometimes 2 weeks per Maimer. I don't learn it inside. I just they learn it and I explain it. But as I go there, I look back. It's like a whole different world. As much as we learned it, and as much as I went into it, I see it now from the perspective of 1,160 pages later. You see the whole thing very differently. But this is in somewhat of a summary of the picture here. So now the next Maimonim are going to continue about Daas Elyon and Daas Tachton, more about it, because as I've said, remember it's all relative. Daas Elyon and Daas Tachton is all depending where you're at. For one person's Daas Tachton might be another person's Daas Elyon. So we're going to learn more about Daas Tachton, Daas Elyon, but I'm going to first obviously finish this Maimer. And we're going to be moving quicker now because we now don't have Tzadik Daled to go to, because the Rebbe Rashab, the Frierdiker Rebbe finished that Hemshech, or did not finish it, but we learned it till the end that we have. But before I continue, if anybody has any questions or comments, now is a good time.
Yes, please. I have two questions. It uses the word there's two hashgachos. I'm not sure what hashgacha means here. It sounds like there's two perspectives. Hashgacha might mean supervision, checking things out, making certain they're proper. Or here it seems like it's perspective. How would one properly translate it?
I thought I explained it when we learned it first. Basically, God can look at existence in two ways. Now, obviously, we're not talking about Atzmos here, because Atzmos is beyond looking; it doesn't need to look. But we're talking about when in Giluyim, in the world of Giluyim, in Shtalshlus, there's two ways God can look at existence. We learned that, for example, the expression Yedeya or Yedua. God knows, or it's known to him. So Chassidus explains, known to him is more from a distance. Like he sees it the bird's eye view. When we read psukim like Erdana, the Eshma Hiktsa Kosa, when God says, let us descend and listen to the cry from Zdoim. So what do you mean? Where is he descending from? So Chassidus explains it's a whole biur in Atzilus, Erdana, the idea of Pasach Elyon and Teira Eir, and it's along with the biurim throughout Chassidus, that God doesn't have to come down to see what's happening, but he wants to see it from the point of view of our point of view, so to speak, Kavyachol. So it's not a Yerida Gashmis, obviously, but it's God looking like we say, Imei Anechi B'tzara. I am with you in your oppression, in your pain. As opposed to God being aloof, so to speak, and the perspective from above. So in Ashgacha Protis, when you say Ashgacha, like you said, supervision, or perspective, or gazing, it's really the same thing. Ashgacha means God's involvement. So he can look at it more like from above and sees the whole picture, which is more the perspective of the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti. Or God can, so to speak, Erdana, and we used what was another pasuk? I think Rabbi Tachton actually brought it. Another pasuk where you talk about God seeing it from so-called the eyes of creation. So that's really what the two Ashgachas are. And just two different forms of divine providence, or divine supervision, if you wish, or divine governance. And they have different implications, obviously. That when it's from above, it has a very different effect. For example, Yedua makes possible for Bechira. If God is immersed in our perspective, we wouldn't have free choice. So free will is predicated on God, so to speak, the godly perspective not affecting us. So that's one difference between the two. But it's not really relevant. I mean, he said, and there's other differences as well.
Second question.
Yeah.
In the examples, when you first began explaining what it means, the Hisrafshus, he gave over several ideas of teacher and student. When a Rebbe gives Yechidus, my understanding is that, or I've heard the language that he's Hisrafshus, he has to change his clothes every time somebody comes in. Is that idea of Hisrafshus to see the thing, the perspective of the chassid? Is that
Yeah,
applicable?
yeah, that's a good example. That there are
It is.
times where the Rebbe would look from so-called from the outside and sees it that way. And then there's when he's engaging and immersing himself in the chassid or the individual's particular specific aspect. I'll just give you another example. One second, please. Stickle cold. Just give me 1 second. So I was going to give another example. The Rebbe in the Sikha, famous Sikha, Sheftim Nun Aleph. So he speaks the difference between Sheftim and Sheftim. Then he says, "Vashiva shaftayich kivarashena v'yetzayich kivatchila." What's the difference between a Shefet and a Yoyetz, a judge and a advisor? So the Rebbe compares it to Tasel Charav, a Knelech Chaver. A Rav is an authority. You come to a Rav with a Shaila, he's speaking to you Mamayla Lamata. From the Torah's point of view, what's your Shaila? And he gives you a psak. A Chaver is not authoritative. A Chaver you're getting advice from. He listens to you, hears the nuances. So it's not a black and white what the Torah says. Which the truth is a Rav has to sometimes be like a Yoyetz too. He also has to see the situation because it's not always a black and white discussion. Depends on the person. But it's just a good example where one is more of giving authoritative ruling, like a Bezdin. This is the rule, a Shefet, and one is a Yoyetz. Like he listens, different perspective. He's much more immersed in your reality. So in a sense, the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti is more Malmaila. It's telling us what God wants us to do. The Ayin of the Yesh Nivra is also godly, but it's a godly which is more like part of who we are within us and immerses itself in our situation. And Yesh Bezeh, Mashein Bezeh, each one has a mile over the other. The authority, obviously, you're getting a clear picture from above what the Torah, what God wants. The other one, it doesn't have that type of gili. But on the other hand, it's much more bepnimius because it's concerned with your particular concerns and details and makes it much easier to integrate and internalize. So the truth is you need both. This is a very common theme. You have, for example, the concept differently, Moshe and Aaron. Who Moshe of Aaron, who Aaron of Moshe. Chassidus explains. So Moshe is the Shishbina de Malka. He's like the escort, the representative of the king. And Aaron is Shishbina de Matronisa. He's the representative, the escort of the Matronisa, of the queen. So you have a king and a queen. Sometimes compared actually to the parents escorting a chas and kala. But the point is, Moshe's Inyan was to tell us what God wants. He was on Har Sinai. Obviously, he cared like a Rebbe does, and he broke the tablets, and he prayed for the Jews, and he cried for them. But he wasn't immersed with them in the daily activities. Aaron, on the other hand, we know, would go and make shalom bayis, and would tell friends who are arguing that this one said a nice thing about you, immersed himself much more between the people, and he was among them. That's why it says, Vayifku Kol Yisrael, when Aaron died on the Shchedesh of. And by Moshe it says, Vayifku Kol Bnei Yisrael. Not that the women didn't cry, but people felt the loss in a more personal way because he was so immersed in their days. Moshe was not involved with their daily activities. He was more the man of God who spent time in Har Sinai, spent time in the Mishkan, when they added to the Chashama, and would come out and tell the people what God wants. And you need both. You need one to come, so-called, exactly like this. You need the Ayin of the Yesh Nivra, of the Yesh Amiti, that reflects the divine, the chief of staff, if you wish. And you need the one that is involved more with the details. So let's say people had a question. We know Moshe taught Aaron, and then the children of Aaron came in, and then the Skenim came in. So the end of Aaron heard it 3 times, the whole process of the Seder, how they learned. So Moshe always remained, so to speak, above, especially when he began to delegate, as Yisrei advised. And that's necessary. A Rebbe has to be in his place. He's the Melech. And then there is the being involved more. So that would be a way of explaining a little more what you just mentioned in a way that's more palatable or palpable. I keep confusing the two, this topic. But it's a good way of applying actually these two levels more in our own Aveda, in our own relationship. Like, you can say a parent and a child. There are times you have to be a parent as a discipline authority. There are times you have to care and really immerse yourself and see what really the child needs and be able to listen closely. And really, you need a combination of both, to be honest. If anything, to be healthy, you need both. Okay?
See, by our Rabbi, he was both. He's both totally involved with every individual and therefore...
Yeah, but still the Rebbe remained the Rebbe and he wanted mashpim. The Rebbe would not go to the yeshiva and sit down with the bochrim and get involved in every detail. And that's not his role. But I'm just saying it's measured. Listen, there's iskalus. Both need both. But still, Moshe and Aaron are two different individuals.
His letters to each person individually seems like the personal touch.
Yeah, but the Rebbe still said he wants mashpim and he wanted parents and educators. There was a role they played. That's what I'm trying to point out. The Rebbe did not do both completely.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, we'll just finish this mimer, hopefully.
Would you say, Rabbi Jacobson, that all of Ayin Beis, in a sense, is, even when in the Ayin Beis talks about our avoda milamata, that all of it is still from Daas Elyon's perspective, that it's from God. The Rabbi Rashav is bringing it down from God, looking from his perspective, even when it discusses our avoda, but it's how God is. It's not from milamata l'mayla. He's revealing something from Yeshemiti, from Ayin Shel Yeshemiti.
I don't think you can quantify that way. Ayin Beis elaborates hundreds of pages on both perspectives, and the whole other Mimcha Lekei Hamelach is Torah and Tefillah. Torah is Mamayla Lamata, Tefillah is Mamata Lamayla. As a matter of fact, we're really much more in the Tefillah section here. In volume 3, he's going to go back to Mamayla Lamata a lot more. Listen, Chassidus never is limited. You're going to see everything everywhere. So I wouldn't say that if you compare Samach Vov and Ayin Beis, there is an element where Samach Vov focuses more on Aveda B'Koyach Atzmei. Basically, the Ben Shanasa Eved, it focuses on the Eved part, how we lift ourselves up to reach a higher place. Ayin Beis is more Eved Shanasa Ben. It focuses more how the Giluyim of Elikus become one with us. But either way, there's no way you can get around it. It's every mitzvah, every detail needs mamata lamayla, mamayla lamata. There's nowhere that one doesn't exist without the other. And everywhere Chassidus it talks asusa de la'ela, asusa de la'tata. Nisan, Iyar, Sivan. Tishrei, Nisan. Wherever you go, you're going to find a mamayla lamata and a mamata lamayla. Every bracha we make, Asher kedeshanu mitzvah v'tzivanu, that's Mamayla, that's the Eibishter's general picture. Al lahadlik ner Chanukah, al natilas lulav, al achilas matzah. That's the specific. So you're always dealing with adira b'tachtenim. You need to have the details, which is the focus really from below, the lower level, the ayin of the yesh hanivra in the language he's using here, and then you need to connect it to the big picture. So I would say that I find it equally, both of them there all the time. And really, because the Rebbe Rashab is also giving us a blueprint. Each of us have different perspectives. Like when you're sitting and learning Torah, you're getting more or less the picture of how God sees existence. When you're davening, you are bringing yourself and how you see it. And how you're connecting to God from within your needs. And you need Torah and Tefillah. It would be like saying, can you have Torah without Tefillah or Tefillah without Torah? No. You need both. And then Gemilas Chasadim is obviously the action. So in comparison to Samach Vov, generally speaking, Samach Vov is more going out of your Metzias. And Ayin Beis is more bringing it into your Metzias. So you can say one is more Mamata Lamayla or like Ben Shanasa Eved, and one is more Eved Shanasa Ben. Ben is more Torah because you're connecting. Eved is more Kabbalah Sel, you're going out of yourself, the bittul. But you really need both for it to be complete. So it's hard to I wouldn't limit this. It would be like saying all of Chassidus focuses on Mamayla Lamata or Lamata Lamayla. And the truth is, it's both.
What I guess I wanted to say is that even that everything, I think all of Ayin Beis, I think we'd all agree, is written through Ruach HaKodesh. I mean, it's bringing down the highest levels of Oros of Tohu. And when, as I understand it, Daas Tachton.
I don't know what's you said now a bunch of sentences, which I don't necessarily everybody agrees exactly with what you just said.
That's not all Ruach HaKodesh.
I mean, you're saying Hergeshim right now. I mean, Ruach HaKodesh.
Yes.
Is it Ruach HaKodesh or is it Shechina Medaberes Metegrene? Means a lot of ways to phrase it. I'm not sure what you're trying to say. You're saying that it's Divrei Elokim Chaim, yes.
Yes. So what I'm trying to say is that Daas Tachton, as I understand it, is really from our perspective, a Jew's perspective from Milamata, that's through our avoda in Olam Hazeh Gashmi, from the Tachton, we're able to climb the ladder in understandings in our avoda, which is, to me, a very different reality than a Rebbe bringing down the ultimate blueprint. Even when he's discussing how we have to do our work, he's doing it from up to the highest levels of the skira achas, the viewpoint from God, that is the Godhead, so to speak, how he views avoda, rather than we're bringing it up through our own personal avoda. That's sort of like what I'm saying.
I could also phrase it the other way around, that the Rabbeim, starting from the Alter Rebbe, the way they experience godliness is one thing. When they wrote Chassidus Chabad, when the Alter Rebbe wrote Tanya, he says it's Likutei Eitzes. It's a collection of personal advice, because time was not, they're not allowed to speak to every individual. He's collecting all the questions and all the answers to the questions. And therefore you could actually say that Chassidus Chabad is actually Mamata Lamayla, because it's being malbish elikus in Seichel Anushi that we could understand and we can relate to. So what you're saying to me is let's just go back to the Jewish relativity theory. It's all relative. If you're talking about compared to the highest levels of elikus, that's Lamayla Meseichel, like the Baal Shem Tov or Kabbalah, then Chabad is actually a manifestation from a type of Daas Tachton. It's taking Daas Elyon and seeing it from the Daas Tachton, from examples, from my flesh I behold God, using examples of Havana Vasaga that every one of us can understand, which is why the Alter Rebbe, there was a challenge to the Alter Rebbe's Gilui of Chassidus Chabad, because he was putting it into Oisis that common human beings like us can experience. If you're talking Lefi Erech, us, yes, obviously the Maimer Chassidus is much more elokus, and then when you apply it to your personal life, it's more Daas Tachton. But I don't see this as a black and white type of statement. To me, you can say both. I can see Chassidus as being Daas Tachton, I can see it as being Daas Elyon, and I can see both. I think at the end of the day, you need to keep both in mind all the time. And there are times where the Rebbe, for example, gives a command to do the 10 Mivtzoyim. That not necessarily, that means you just have to follow learning Rambam every day. And then there's the Havana Vasoga, how we internalize it, that it becomes more part of us. That's more Daas Tachton. So I see them both happening all the time, with the Rabbeim are both bringing us a perspective of elikus, but also a perspective how a human mind can understand it. Now, of course, the Rebbe's mind is different than our mind, but still he puts it in issues that the Alter Rebbe put it in words that we can understand. We actually can understand these ideas. Now, our job is to take it off the page and internalize it really personally. So obviously, it all comes down to relative, even within yourself. There are times you're more in a state of Daas Elyon, sometimes in a state of Daas Tachton, as I explained in previous classes. And I think it's just a matter of combining both these elements together. And that's the bottom line in this, all of this. You know, when the Tzemach Tzedek said a Maimer Chassidus, and then they were sitting and arguing Pshat, and Rabbi Hillel Parcha disagreed with the Tzemach Tzedek in the Pshat of the Maimer. So they asked him, how could you disagree? It's the Tzemach Tzedek's Maimer. He just said the Maimer. He knows Pshat better than you do. So he said, when the Rebbe says the Maimer, it's Kinesinos and Messinai. But now when we're discussing it, the Rebbe is talking in the language of Seichel Anushi. And here, we could, just like we could have a disagreement and an argument with Moshe Rabbeinu, because you're learning now on the Havana of it. And the Rebbe is now in the state of one of us, so to speak. Now, his mind base be superior even in Daas Tachton, but here we could have at least a discussion. So there's two different elements in everything, and you'll always find that I think the real fusion of both, personally and in our relationship with the Rebbe, is key. The Makiv, the Pnimi, the Daas Elyon, the Daas Tachton. So when I learned this, when the Rebbe Rashab says Daas Tachton, the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra sees it from the eyes of the Nivra, that's a very strong statement. That means even God, let alone the Rebbe, sees it from our perspective. That's why he says, Shchinta begalusa, God cries with us. Kalonim Izreya, when we're hurt, God is hurting. How could you say that? Because there's an element of godliness that is part of who we are. Like the Rebbe brings often about the Talmud Shagola, Gael and Rabbi Imai. If a Talmud has to go to Ir Miklat, to one of the cities of refuge, that the Rav goes with him. The Rav is above him; doesn't belong there. But a Rav goes with his the captain goes with his people. Moshe Rabbeinu is buried in the Midbar because he stayed with his people. He wouldn't go into Eretz Yisrael. He would only go with his people. So there's an element where the Rebbe is involved, and the Rebbe speaks about the Frierdiker Rebbe not being buried in Israel, but here in America, like Yosef HaTzadik in Mitzrayim. He's with the people to give us the hope from within. Then there's Yaakov Avinu that's buried in Eretz Yisrael. That's more Mamayel Lamata. So you're going to have, wherever you turn, you're going to find these both elements, and they're both absolutely necessary. And I would not try to pigeonhole them and say this is here and this is there. Everywhere you'll find the other just to round it out. And here we're talking that in the Lakus itself, in godliness, you have a Daas Tachton, which would mean that a Rebbe, yes, also sees it from our point of view. In many ways, Lakuta Amorim, as deep as it is, but bottom line is the Alter Rebbe was saying these are eitzes, advice I gave to people, and I'm giving to people on their terms, not on my terms. And there are times where, like I said, the difference between a Rav and a Yoyetz, a Rav and a Chaver. The Rav is meant to come from a higher level. The Chaver is meant to come from within us.
Shkoyach, thank you.
I would suggest that the Daas Elyon, Daas Tachton of the Rebbe Rashab by us is all Daas Elyon. It's without it being explained many times over, it would remain far distant and very, would not be.
I think that's the statement that has to be made. Each person has to come to the terms themselves. When you learn Chassidus, sometimes when you learn a mimer, you feel it's above you, and it's like giving a perspective from above. But sometimes if you internalize the mimer well enough, I can tell you that there are people who will tell you that I feel it from a Daas Tachton point of view. It all comes down to the individual. I don't think there's a black and white statement like that.
Definitely
It all depends how well you've internalized the idea. There are people who have internalized Chassidus that it's literally on a Daas Tachton level for them, meaning they've absorbed it, they become one. And then there are things that remain above, and it's true, they are a perspective from a higher place. I think it comes down to how deeply you internalize it.
What I was suggesting is that to get it on the level that it can be internalized, the statement of the Rebbe Rashab needs to be explained quite a bit. And we experienced that by Tzaddik Daled, that the Frierdiker Rebbe explained the Rebbe Rashab to a great extent. And,
okay, but then we're talking about after you come to understand it, then it can become a Daas Tachton experience. That's what I'm saying.
Yes, of course. I was talking about reading it. And,
well, in general, I told you, Torah in general is Daas Elyon because you're reading something that you're being told. It's not coming from your experience. You're being told there was Matan Torah. You're being told put on tefillin, Shabbos, Kashrus, Achdus Hashem. You're being taught. The goal is then to turn. Tefillah is the opposite. Bakoshes Tzrochav. Davening is all about your needs. What do I need? Health, children, Bonachai, Mezena, etc., etc. So it's a very different. It's coming from within your gut, like when your needs. You're crying out to God, to your Father. Torah is telling you what God wants of you. So in general, that's correct. But you want Torah to become internalized, and you want Tefillah to also connect to the higher levels. Let me now go. I'm going to go back to we're going to go to the end of the mimer. So let me go. I'm just going back to page 1154. The questions. It's been a long time since we began this mimer. Probably 40, 50 classes back, 50 classes back. So we're talking about more than 50 days. You're talking about 7 weeks. You're talking about 8, 9 weeks ago. So the mimer begins. It's a Shabbos Tshuva mimer. I just want to go to the questions, and we'll see how the Rebbe Rashab answers them. Anochi nechi hu moiche psha'echa lemani. I, double anochi, hu moiche psha'echa lemani. He moiche is he overlooks or erases your sins, lamani, on my behalf. I, not he, I overlook the sins, your sins, for my sake. The Rebbe Rashab says, Pirish lamani, laman shmei yisbarach, for God's sake. Like Rashi says, Lo b'schuscha, not in your merit am I overlooking or am I forgiving your sins, but and not in your merit, ubitzitchas avisecha, and the merit and the virtue of your fathers, but lamani, laman shmei. So Rebbe Rashab asks, the whole thing of a sin, what doesn't affect lamaila, because it says, ma ichpas leila baruch im sheichet min ha'erev or sheichet min ha'tzeir. Savar. What difference does it make to God if you shecht the throat or you shecht from the back? Just as an example, shchita has to be the erev. So why are you saying lamani? What do you mean? Because for your sake. It's for our sake. Umikram ola dibra kasuv im chatosam atiful v'rabu p'she'echa im tzedaktam atitin lo yomam meyotcha yikach. The pasuk says clearly, if you sin, what effect does it have on him? And if there are many p'she'echa, he brings the same word, p'she'echa. You many sins. Im tzedaktam atitin lo. If you do kindness, what are you adding to him? And what are you taking from him? In other words, God is beyond it all. So what's this lamancha? Lamani, rather. And Gamawi Inyan, he also asks, what's this twice anochi? By Matan Torah only says anochi Hashem Elokecha once. And here it says twice. Those are the two questions. So now the Rebbe Rashab is going to answer. There he said, Lahavin zeh yesh lahagdim ashen isbar le'il. Now he's going to answer it. According to everything we learned. And what did we learn? About the 2 days in the Lakus itself, in the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti, Ayin of the Yesh Nivra. So according to what we learned, Yuvan Masha Kosav Anechi Amonechi Hu Moiche Psha'echa. This pasuk we just reviewed. We'll understand what it means. Tihinei, because now Slichas Havena is the forgiveness of sins. Zeodavke Bebchinas Ayin Ha'amiti. The forgiveness of sins is dafka from the level of the ayin amiti, not the ayin that's involved with us, because that's commensurate to us. It has to come from a higher place, because if you sin, you can't correct it from the same place where the sin is. You need to go the ayin amiti. The liyah she'enim misalim klal, like we just learned. The ayin amiti is not subject to any concealment, including the tzedek ha'elim, is concealment for the need of creating the worlds, including, of course, the halamis of Averis. Like we just read. So the halamis and the concealments that happen in this world, that happen through the sins, and like alakim acherim and so on, are not concealed by the ayin of the ayin amiti. Al kain, that's why I'm on page 1161. Misham dafke yochli eslichas avenis. Like whenever you have, let's say, two people, two friends, get into a fight, spouses. So you need to bring a higher energy, not from the place where they're fighting, that will, so to speak, come and mend and resolve the issue. So that's why dafka from there, where there's no Helen, you have to find a deeper connection, so to speak, of love that transcends the concealment, And that's where you have the slichas avenus, forgiveness of sins. The hine begins Daas Tachton, because now Daas Tachton, ma'achish shemesalm l'tzedek savos, because it gets concealed for the purpose of creation. You need to have a creation that sees things not from the perspective of, so it's due to concealment. Due to an abundance, an increased amount of concealments and coverings, like we learned earlier, there can be a chizos canal. There can be some type of holding on where they're getting some energy from because it's concealed. And that's why the wound or the hurt, the pagam, the wound created by the Aveda is negation. It affects there. Just for example, if a child came over to you right now and give you a little kick or scratched you, hopefully you're not going to get on your hands and knees and start fighting with the child. Why? Because you're not in the same league. He can't hurt you. It's a child. But if someone of your level, that's on your own level, insults you or hurts you, there's a pagam. You feel hurt. You feel insulted. So if you're a level that's beyond your transcendence, it's not going to affect you. So basically, where's the pagam negeya? Where there is the concealments and it's on your level. So to speak, the Daas Tachton, that's where you have the pagam has an impact. You want a tikkun of the pagam, you go to a higher level where there's less impact or no impact because it's beyond Helam. Like what he's going to say right now, although Bechin is Daas Elyon, ain't a pagam negeya. In Daas Elyon, the pagam is not negeya because it's meaningless on that level. And that's why from there, you can draw the energy Neisa Oven to carry the sin, meaning to overlook it or to forgive it. There's different levels. Neisa Oven, Peked Oven, like you said, Slichas Avenes, Moichib Shacha. These are different levels, but overall, the idea that you can heal. So healing always comes from a step outside of or higher than the place where the wound is affecting. That's why, God forbid, you sometimes need medication or surgery. Why can't it just heal on its own? Because not all wounds can heal on their own because the problem is still there. And you need something of an outside force, so to speak, from a higher place that either strengthens the immune system or expedites the process or accelerates the healing, etc., etc. So that's the same idea, that sometimes the wound is deep in that level and you can't just go back, sometimes you deal with spouses and have arguments. And it's a deep argument, you can't just say, okay, back to business as usual. No, there's a problem. So you need some deeper intervention or deeper connection. Moshe Rabbeinu had to go on Har Sinai for 80 days to get forgiveness after the Chet HaEgel. He had to dig deeper. He needed to get Yud Gimel Midas HaRachamim. Why couldn't he just say to God, bygone is bygone, let's make up, everything is cool, everything is good? Because that's not Pasha. They betrayed God. There was Aveda Zara involved, Elikim Acherim, a real pagam. It severed the relationship. So Moshe had to go deeper, basically higher, to reach into godliness and a higher level that can heal and reconcile. Salachti kidvarecha. Till then, the Eibishter didn't say it on Yom Kippur. Just pointing out, explaining that Daas Tachton itself, that's where the pagam is. Al b'chinas Daas Elyon ein ha'pagam negeya misham nimshach liyis neisov v'zehu moiche psha'echa lemani. So now he's going to tie. So what's lemani? We said earlier, lemani, the God is beyond it all. Why is it for him? It's for us. The healing is for us. God doesn't need it. So what's the lemani? So he teaches lemani pirush leman yud. So lemani is made up of leman. 4 yud is the last yud in the lemani. He's teaching the hine yizbor lekamon. I was going to explain what that means. It's an interesting diuk. The hine yizbor lekamon, it shall be explained later, meaning that Rebbe Rashab is going to explain this later in later Maimorim. Shagam eses spheres hem b'chinas Daas Tachton. That also the 10 spheres are the level of Daas Tachton. As I said, everything is relative. Okay. And that's why he says, forgiving or overlooking the sins, Laman Yud, for the Yud of Daas Tachton. So it's not Lamani for the higher levels of Elikuz. Daas Elyon doesn't need the Meicheb Shecha. Daas Elyon is the force that you bring in to heal. Which is Lamani. He's saying Lamani is also for the Esesphiris, the Yud of the Esesphiris. So since the Esesphiris also have an element of Daas Tachton, because compared to Ein Sof, Lifnei Tzimtzum, or Ein Sof higher than Atzilus, the Esesphiris are a structure. So relatively speaking, they're Daas Tachton. Therefore, there could be a Pagam. So Lamani means Laman the Yud of the Esesphiris. That's how he's teaching it. Okay. That's why he says Laman Yud. Umechias Apshayim, and the erasing of, or the eliminating of the sins. Zel mebchinas anechi anechi. That's the double anechi. Bchinas pnimius hakeser, the inner dimension of keser. Shezel bchinas ha'ayin ha'amiti. That's the level of the true ayin ha'amiti. Daas Elyon u'kamoshi is bar. So we have here now all the levels here. Daas Tachton and Daas Elyon is, in Daas Tachton, Psha'echa have an effect. Laman the Yud. And the healing or the recovery or the cleaning up comes from Anechi Anechi, which is the Ayin Amiti Pnimis HaKeser. Again, he says, U'kamoshi is bar, because we didn't learn that yet. We'll learn it soon. Okay, but what about Matan Teira? Uba Matan Teira nemer pam achas Anechi. It only says once Anechi. The Raisa Mechochma Nafkas. Because Teira, which is by Matan Teira, comes Nafkas. It emerges, it's drawn out from Chochma. V'anechi ub'chinas keser. So Raisa Mechochma Nafkas, Anechi is b'chinas keser. V'hain b'chinas chitzenis ha-keser. The outer dimension of keser, moker ha-chochma. So you say Teira Raisa Mechochma Nafkas. Teira comes from Chochma. Chochma is rooted in Ksenius Keser, so that's the first Anechi. Aval Beis Pam Anechi, a double, twice Anechi, that's Ubchinas Pnimis HaKeser. That's already the Anechi and Anechi, that's Pnimis HaKeser, which is not relating to Chochma, that's beyond Chochma, and that's where you have the correction. So Teira, like we know it says in Medrash, Teira tells us what we should be doing. And when you're asked Teira, what would happen if a person sins? So Teira doesn't have a solution, because Teira comes from the world of what is the law, what is the rules. Tshuva teaches us and reaches into Anechi, higher than Teira, to be able to correct someone that is over, God forbid, on something that says in the Teira. V'zesh mamshichim al-yedei tshuva. And this level of Anechi you draw through tshuva, not through Teira alone. The mamamakim koresicha Hashem. So the expression mamamakim, from the depths. The mamakim Chassidus explains is double emek, not one, not emek. Mamamakim, from the depths, plural. Koresicha Hashem. I call to God. Mebchinas emek leemek, emek to emek. So it's not just one emek. One depth would be like one anechi, and the second emek begins primis v'atzmus ein sof. So it's depth, but the depth within the depth, that's the inner and core of ein sof. And this is through, the avodah of it is through an inner cry from the depths of the heart. To you, my heart speaks. Bakshu ponai. I want to see your. I want your face. See your face. Bechinas pnimis, the emek hanefesh. So you see, it's coming from the pnimis, the inner and depth of the soul, from the spirit. Vayidezes ponecha Hashem avakish. Amaliba bakshu ponai. Yeah, you request the face, and then the response is ponecha Hashem avakish. The face of God I request. V'zeu shapirish Rashi. Now Lamani is saying, not in your merit, and not in the tzedakah, the virtue of your parents, of the ovis. Which means the hamshacha zu eina al yedei haschus de Torah mitzvahs. It's not through the merit of your Torah mitzvahs. Kima yedei hatshuva. So he's adding another taich. That's through tshuva, because your merit has been flawed and injured due to the begam of the Averis. So it's not through your merit, it's through the power of tshuva. V'zeu anechi anechi hu meicheb sha'echa. And this is the meaning, anechi anechi, I, the twice anechi, overlook or over erase your sins. The mebchinas anechi misha anechi. Now he's teaching anechi misha anechi, which is more than just anechi. The I who is the misha anechi, which is the level, it says, b'chinas primis hakeser. It's like saying anechi misha anechi. I, the real I, so to speak. The level of primis hakeser, hu de lo yoda le bar iu b'lechadui. Okay, this is an expression from Zayar. I think didn't we read it earlier, if I recall? Well, literally it means that no one outside of you knows it except you yourself, or when you're one with you. No one outside knows it. No one knows you as you are in your inner self. So it's really beyond us. That's not b'schuscha. You're reaching primis hakeser that's beyond, so to speak, Daas Tachton. You're reaching Daas Elyon that none of us really know. Yeah, as you are on your own, above existence, basically. Daas Tachton is how Elikus relates to existence. The Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. Now we're talking about reaching a place that's not in our schus or our merit. It's due to reaching a place that's lamani. It sounds interesting because before he touched lamani and Daas Tachton, now he's touching it's going back, that this is coming from a place that's anechi, anechi. So how does that stem with lamani with yud? Not sure. From there is drawn the power of meicha to erase the sins. Lamani b'chol seder ishtalshlus. Or maybe here he's answering it. Lamani, on my behalf, meaning the spheres. So you're drawing from a place that's higher than seder ishtalshlus, the ayin of the yesh amiti, which is not an our schus. And that's drawing down into the whole Seder Shtalshlus, also Lamani, Laman Yud, the spheres and Shtalshlus. That should be the elimination of the sins. This is through tshuva, through which we draw down from the Ayin Amiti. So yeah, the Lamani is like in between. There's the let's see the pasuk again. Anochi, Anochi. Second. Hu meicheb shecha lamani. So Anochi, Anochi is the level of Ayin Amiti, Kes Primis HaKeser. That's from where we erase the sins. And it erases lamani, saying that it erases it also in all the shtalshlus, including the Daas Tachton of the 10 spheres. Okay, that's the pshat. It's clear. Okay. So with this, we finally conclude on page 1161, which mimer? I don't even remember the number.
Rabbi Jacobson.
One second. We conclude mimer 138 in Ayin Beis. Okay, if you have any questions, if not, we'll conclude here. Go ahead.
Yeah, when it says lo b'tzchuscha b'tzchascha v'secha, through tshuva, my question there is two things. One is tshuva itself is a mitzvah, so why isn't that through your schus? Doing tshuva is fulfilling a mitzvah of the Torah, and it is to me it would seem like that is a schus, that you're able to affect this tikkun through tshuva, through Torah mitzvahs. It would seem that would be through schus, your schus. Even
the
tshuva.
answer is very obvious. Tshuva is a gift from God that says that even if you make a mistake and you transgress against me, I am giving you a power called Anoichi Anoichi, that when you cry out, you can reach a place that's higher than Torah. He's explaining Schuscha Tzidchascha is the level of the regular level of Torah mitzvahs. Tshuva is always something that's above the system. Moshe had to pray. It's not just another activity. You have to take a reach, and it's ultimately something beyond the system that we're accessing. So we don't call so that's what he's saying. Schuscha Tzidchascha, meaning it can't come from your regular merits. It has to come from a deeper place that's above it. That's where the correction comes from.
Even though it is a mitzvah itself, one of the mitzvah.
It's not relevant. The fact that it's a mitzvah is because it only comes through Torah, but it's a mitzvah that has the power to go beyond Torah. Torah can't correct it. Torah cannot give us a solution to when someone transgresses Torah. So you need a power that's higher. Tshuva, if you look in many places, you'll see it's not a regular mitzvah. Mitzvah is simply because everything comes through Torah. But the point is that tshuva, you transgressed, you broke Torah. That's where tshuva comes from. So tshuva is you broke Torah. So once you broke Torah, it could be that you never can correct it anymore. The begam is there. So God is saying, no, I give you the power to reach Anoichi Anoichi above the system and draw down from there to correct. That's more than just doing a mitzvah. That requires you going beyond your regular structure.
Especially Yom Kippur.
Say, b'mokim shabal tshuva emdim tzadikim gemurim ein yechem lamed. Why don't you just say tshuva is a mitzvah and tzadikim are doing mitzvahs? So why are they at a different level? Because they're going to a different. It's a whole different dimension. Yom Kippur is a very different level than Matan Torah.
I understand that tshuva is a unique mitzvah that we're able to go to the Bala Sefer
About the
Torah.
mitzvah, he's talking about correcting. There's a pagam. If you ask Torah, Torah does not have a solution for a pagam. That's what the only way you can fix a wound is going to a deeper place. That's what tshuva does. Not sure why you're focusing on the word mitzvah here. It's coming from a place that's higher than Torah. That you understand?
Yes, I mean you're reaching to the.
But that's why it's not schuscha, and it's not the schus avisecha, because your schus and avisecha is mitzvahs which now there's a pagam. It's been affected. It's been wounded. You need now something beyond that.
Torah itself is giving us a way to, so to speak, make an appeal in a court of course that goes above the regular court to a higher court.
Yes, schuscha is the schus of Torah and mitzvahs. That's not enough once you broke Torah and mitzvahs. Okay, good. Okay, so my friends, we shall stop here.